Hi, thanks for finding my show. My name is Dr. Steve Simpson, and I'm an elite performance coach. And if you're thinking, well, that means I'm in the wrong place, with respect, you're wrong, because my view of everybody is that we're all elite performers and we can all raise our game to at least the next level. And it might be quite a bit easier than you think, and that's what this webinar is all about. Now, today, as you probably know, I'm not a great fan of schools, or more accurately, I'm not a great fan of the schools that I went to. And the only good thing that I could see about going to school really was that we did have some good sports teachers. But apart from that, I didn't learn a lot. I had to learn in different ways as I got older. And I thought, to be a teacher, the worst possible subject to be a teacher in was history. And I now realize that history is not a problem. History is actually really interesting. It's just the teachers, they didn't really know how to make it interesting, and they missed the big point. Because the point of history to me is that you can look back and not make the same mistakes that people have made all through the ages. And the other thing is that history is about people, many of them so-called great people, and you can understand a lot about psychology from them. And because our psychologies haven't changed, I think our reptile brains 1,000 years ago are pretty much the same as our reptile brains are now. Put people under stress, strip away that thin veneer of civilization, and stand well back. So I'm going to play at being a history teacher for about the next 5 minutes, and hopefully I can tell you a little story that might entrance you and ignite your curiosity, if nothing else. And it might also, who knows, make us all better therapists, or make it at least us all better to manage our unruly brains. So I'm going back as far as I can go, which is a few billion years ago, and it was before there was life on our planet. If we could sort of beam down there now, what would we see? Well, we'd see a very toxic atmosphere full of ammonia. We'd look around, we'd see volcanoes gushing noxious gases, and we'd see the sea and probably not much else. But this is what the biologists would say, this was the primordial soup. The only thing that was missing from the picture was life. And life actually is curiously simple, because you only need a few elements. And now I'm going to put my chemist teacher's hat on. If you've got nitrogen and oxygen and hydrogen and sulfur, I probably missed one out, but those are the building blocks of life. And at some point, just before life sparked off in the world, there must have been some kind of huge electromagnetic storm or something which injected atmosphere and caused a few of these molecules to collide. And those were definitely the nitrogens and the hydrogens and the other things that I mentioned. And that's where life happened. We can't put a finger on, say, exactly what time it might be, but I would say on the clock, you would call that 0 + 1 second. Now, the first forms of life, you would hardly know they were living. They were just a few collections of molecules. But the thing that they had is that they could double up, they could replicate themselves. And that's a primitive form of life. And before long, in just a few billion years or something, we had seas that had fish in them. We had the land, we had the reptiles, and some of them decided to be true amphibians. But even the ones that weren't amphibious, reptiles are still usually quite happy in water. And then late in the day, very late in the day, at about 2 seconds to midnight on the 24-hour clock, we had people like us who were shambling around the planet and grunting at each other and killing anything that got in our way. And a little more biology now, because we know that those sort of primitive human life forms had 24 pairs of chromosomes. Now, chromosomes are the genetic structures. In every cell has its set of chromosomes, and those are the powerhouses of life. They are the factory that's responsible for making all of the things that we need in our body. And these early humans, well, they weren't humans, they were precursors of humans. They had 24 pairs of these chromosomes. Chromosomes are always paired. And a chromosome is a helix, it's a double helix. And in the last show, I didn't know I was going to be talking about this again this week, I talked about telomeres. Now, this is my shoelace, but for the purpose of this demonstration, it's a chromosome. And at the end, there's this little plastic thing, which is called a telomere. And the job of the plastic thing in the chromosome is to stop everything unwinding. Well, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes in Homo sapiens, and so do the Neanderthals, which shows that we're very closely related, or were, before we exterminated them because we didn't like them. And so what has happened to that extra pair of chromosomes? Well, the theory is, and there's a lot of science to support it, that chromosome number 2, which is the longest chromosome in our cell, and contains almost the most DNA, the proteins, about 8%, I think. If that's studied, you can see halfway along the chromosome, somewhere about there, you can see remnants of a telomere. So the theory is that that 2 sets of chromosomes combined to give us one long set. So that's where the missing one went. And this happened probably about 30 to 50,000 years ago, which in evolutionary terms is not very long ago. And the curious thing here is that that's a period in our history which you would call the Ice Age Renaissance, because as a species, we went through a lot of rapid changes, and it might be that because of these 2 chromosomes joining together, it sparked off all kinds of other reactions. Now, what did we do? Well, I was watching the news yesterday, and in Jersey, which is an island off the south coast of the UK, nearer France actually than the UK, but for some reason we own it. It's part of the so-called United Kingdom. Well, some archaeologists found little stones, and I think they call them baguettes because they're seen in France as well. And these little sort of square-shaped stones had been cut to that size and smoothed, and you could see very primitive drawings on it. And they reckon that, they haven't dated it completely accurately yet, but they reckon that's about 20,000 years ago. And that's the oldest archaeological finds in this country. So at least some of our ancestors were starting to sketch stuff then. And all over the world, wherever Homo sapiens were, we were being creative. And for the first time, we were making stuff like art. We were presumably becoming interested in spirituality, or at least something that was quite close to it. And it was soon after that. And the greatest thing that happened, of course, is again, the theory is that this is when people learned to talk. And those of you who read my book, The Psychoic Revolution, will know that that's when things started to go, in some ways, very wrong for us. Because once we were able to talk, what that meant is that the smartest talkers amongst us became the greatest manipulators, and liars and cheats and all the rest of it. But it did mean that rather than just living in very small family groups, we will be able to coordinate ourselves into larger groups of people and tribes. And at that time, the ideal tribe was thought to be about 150 people. And so, and then one tribe could take over another. And so we spread to almost all the areas of the world. Now, what does this have to do with with the kind of things we talk about on this show? Well, the thing is, I mentioned the word already, I'm interested in the spiritual side of people's personality, because if there is a good side that's not totally obsessed with the reptile brain, it is our soul, or the spiritual guiding compass that we all have, although for some of us, it gets hidden under a lot of rubbish that life throws at us. And once we became spiritual, we made a leap, and I don't know whether it was a clever leap or a stupid leap, and we started to believe in entities that were outside of us, and that's what some of them would have called gods. And you can understand that at this time, when people were starting to learn to talk, they'd be staring up into the sky at night, and they'd say, that big one, that's what we're going to call the moon. And then they'd see the other ones, brighter things, and they were the planets. And during the day, of course, the thing that they saw that was bigger than anything was the sun. And they knew that when they felt hot, the crops would grow and survival became a lot easier. And when the sun moved away and things became cold, life, particularly at the end of the Ice Age, was very difficult indeed. So they realized that perhaps the sun was the god, and the moon was the goddess, and the planets were some kind of lesser gods, but they were all organized in some way. And when they were short of food or short of rain or basically just short of luck, they would pray to their gods, or they'd have people in their tribe who had the connection to God. And they'd go through all of these kind of rituals and things. And if they thought God wasn't listening, they had to attract God's attention. And so they would start sacrificing animals as gifts to the gods or the god. And if the rain came, then that was okay. But if they were still in drought, they thought they would have to really make a god a little more aware. And so they would start sacrificing people. Obviously, they would choose slaves first, but if the gods really were being very deaf to them, it even got to the point in some ancient societies where they started sacrificing their family members, which doesn't seem a very good idea to me, but apparently to them, that was exactly what was needed. Now, on my social media posts this week, and I've been thinking about this show, and as always, it's only really a couple of hours before we start that I actually really know what direction we're going to go. And then I was mentioning the ancient Romans and their gods, because we are very familiar with the Roman gods. I mean, in our language, most of the days of our week are named after Roman gods. And so are our months. Now, those of us who haven't had a classic Latin education, which is almost all of us, would never really know that. And I didn't know how many gods there were until yesterday. I thought I'd better do a bit of research so I'd know at least a little bit about what I was going to talk about. And there are hundreds of Roman gods. There's a god in charge of everything. There's a god in charge of luck. There's a god in charge of love. There's a god in charge of water fountains. So I can't remember what that god's name was, but if you're having blockages in your water fountains, then I would say that's the first person that you try and get to the help desk for advice. You see, what the Romans did, and this is the trap that we all fall into, is that when things don't work and when we feel we need some help from outside us, we call on the gods, and if the gods don't listen, we start to invent more gods. And that's what the Romans did, because as their empire declined, they just felt the problem was not the way they were running their empire or the people they put in charge of their empire, but it was because they didn't have the right gods on board. And this is how we live today. When things don't work, we start finding other gods to help us out. And with elite performers, when they're in a major event or something, very often they will want to talk to me before. And if they do, the question that I always ask them, the last thing I want to do is to get them kind of confused about things at this late stage. The work has been done by the time you're almost ready to go into a tournament. I'll just say something like, what's the game plan today? And because they've know the kind of questions I ask, they'll answer me straight away. And so then I'll say, okay, well, that sounds a really good game plan. And, we know that during the course of a tournament, there's going to be, the tide's going to turn. So we know that at some point, you're going to lose your form, things won't be for easy, or, you just get bad luck. What are you going to do then? And they're going to say, I'm going to stick to the game plan. You see, because that's the most important thing that I try and tell people do. When things start going wrong, don't start inventing another God to get you out. Much better you stick with the God that's inside you, whatever you want to call that. And so it is with therapies and with healing modalities. That's why there's over 300 types of different psychotherapeutic techniques that people study. And of course, when they've spent their time and money studying a few of these, they say, well, this is the one. This is the only one that really works. And so that's the one that they press. And it's the same with religions as well. We all know how many hundreds of different religions there are. And even the so-called same religions like Christianity have so many different offsets. I mean, if there is a God up there, then I think God would get pretty confused by all of this stuff, and he'd be thinking, well, he or she would be thinking, well, where did I go wrong with these people? Why are they making life so complicated? I didn't expect them all to be history teachers, and I didn't expect them all to be sort of Romans inventing new gods. So that's my food for thought today, just wrapping up my little opening bit, which I always do, which is designed to stimulate a bit of debate or thinking or comments about your own experiences. But hesitating to join the ranks of all the others who've gone before me, you know that I talk about infinite intelligence. I talk about we all have a higher self, that I always definitely talk about how we are so much more capable of doing stuff than we give ourselves credit for. And the things that get in the way of us reaching this higher level of performance is when we start overthinking stuff, and particularly when we start beating ourselves up. So that's my summary of life since it started. So definitely it's time for me to take a deep breath of water and a little sip of water and a deep breath. If I do the two things together, I might stop choking, and that wouldn't help us. So who's got something they'd like to share with us about their week? I can see Johnny's hand up. Yeah, I can see a few of them on the top of my screen. Yeah, go ahead, Johnny.
I was just going to say, I think what you've said is similar, whether it's God or the universe, that it conspires to help us when I think we really want to make changes. It will tend to give us a challenge to see how much we want that change. And I think it reminds you a bit of Napoleon Hill, the 6 feet from gold, and also the burning of the battleships in the background so that they couldn't go backwards, they could only go forwards. So I think sometimes even when we might really want and we don't think that God's helping us, maybe it's because the universe is going to help us but wants to see how much passion or burning desire we have for change or to get what we want. So I think sometimes, as you said, it's not about giving up, it's about staying with the course.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, Johnny, and I can't argue with a word of that. I think you expressed that very well. And it seems to be that most of us find out this for the first time when we really are in a difficult place. And that's probably because we've missed all the hints along the way. And really when we've run out of all options, that's when we start to get a really good idea, or the universe swings in our favor one way or the other. And the examples you gave about the Vikings who used to burn their boats, I mean, they still have ceremonies to celebrate that, but that's what they did when they went to invade a country. The first thing they did was set fire to their boats. So every person who'd come over, they knew there was no retreat, there was no going back. They had to make it work. And so, yeah. And you also said Now, what was the other example you gave, Johnny?
6 feet from gold, the guy that's digging, and if he only had continued, he was 6 feet from the treasure.
Yeah, yeah, that's the South African miner, and yeah, that's a well-told story. But it's true. Sometimes we we can spend our whole life, or we can spend years working towards something, and we finally say, "Oh, had enough. Can't take any more." And we're that far from what we wanted. And there's a guy who told me this story, and it is only a story, so please don't take it literally. But there was this very religious man, and he was a sailor, and he was at sea, and there was a storm, and the wind was way too powerful, and the waves were way too big for him in this yacht on his own with no help. And he heard a noise, and he looked up, and there was a helicopter coming towards him. And on the radio, it was a message from the helicopter saying, we want to drop somebody down here, and we're going to arrange for you to get towed back, to harbour. And he said, I don't need your help. I'm a very religious man, and I know that God will look after me. So they said, well, we can't force you, but we're giving our best advice. And the storm got worse and worse and worse. And the helicopter came back and said again, we've come to save you. I don't need saving. I trust in God. And the thing happened a third time. And the man said, no, don't come back. I told you. And sadly, he lost control of the boat, and he drowned, and he went to heaven. And he was at St. Peter's Gate waiting to be admitted. And St. Peter was there. And he said, name? And the guy gave his name. He said, we weren't expecting you. You've come a bit early, but that's okay. We have room for everybody. He said, anything you want to say? And he said, well, I'm not very happy. I stuck to my faith, and I drowned. And I really thought that I was going to live longer. And St. Peter looked, and he got the file out, and he said, yeah, we sent you the helicopter 3 times. I don't know what else you wanted us to do. So.
Great story.
There's a point to it, isn't there? Like all good stories, there's a point.
There are omens always along the way. The universe always does try, but as you said, when we let the ego get in the way, we don't see these.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, that takes us back to Carl Jung and synchronicities, these strange, apparently coincidental things that happen in life. And we don't recognize at the time what they were or what the message was. As he said, synchronicity is an ever-present reality for those who have eyes to see. And that's the problem. The more busier we are, the more we get trapped in our own head, the more distracted we are, and the less we see that's in front of us. And that's the great thing about coaching, because if you're able to establish a rapport with the person you're working with and allow them to relax and allow them to slow things down a little bit, as a therapist, often there's not very much more you need to do than that, because then they start seeing stuff themselves and they'll be kicking themselves. I should have spotted that years ago. I've always known that. I've always known that I didn't want to do that. But so there we are, another story.
Have to be me again. Just a comment, my personal comment about burning boats. The last few years, I've started doing experiments in my life. Everything I was learning or reading about spiritually or coaching-wise or science-wise, I was trying to put into practice. And at some point I've decided and I've made my mind that I'm gonna change my previous professional life, which was being a chauffeur. And I've decided to sell my car. And for me, that was burning my boats. And I did not make any plan for the future. I just left everything to the universe to decide for me. And of course I had my thoughts, scary thoughts, telling me like, what you're gonna do, you will have no money, what are you doing, Greg? And then I was just coming back to saying to myself, I just trust the universe. I know it will be fine, whatever happens. The process of burning the boat, which was my car, took me a good few months. And I struggled occasionally with the thoughts. But I kept to my plan, which was to have no plan. And a few months forward, I'm a coach as well. I'm working as a coach, and then that was my dream. Months before that, and I'm working as a football agent, which is even a bigger dream. Maybe not a bigger dream, but also a dream. So it seems like burning the boats just worked for me, at least. Thanks.
Well, thanks for sharing that with us, Greg. And you definitely did have to show courage there and conviction. And you certainly, to burn your car, nothing to go back to there. Anybody have similar things like that happen to them in their life? Okay, perhaps I will. Yes, Sue, please.
I was going to say, I think there are times when I should have done and didn't have the courage to. There were several times where I felt I wasn't on the right path and should change direction, but had children to bring up, and I can't say I regret what I did, because I don't think there's any point in regretting, but I definitely applaud Greg for burning his boats and going with it. And
you're right, Sue, and we can all say the same things about ourselves, for sure. And the more trappings of life that you're involved with, the harder it is. I mean, certainly, I've never called children a trapping or a problem, but when you have small children, you have a responsibility to them, and that's automatically going to make you choose the safe option. But the good news is that it's never too late. I mean, fortunately now, if we look after ourselves reasonably well, we live longer than any other previous generation. And it took a big wake-up call for me, because I changed my life almost completely 12 years ago, and some of you will know this and some of you won't. But I was a doctor working internationally in increasingly senior and managerial positions, and therefore being paid a lot of money, and enjoying traveling around the world in business class, sometimes first class, and staying in wonderful hotels, and being picked up at airports by people who looked a lot like Greg, and this car looked a lot like his car, which was a very nice car, by the way. And I'd be lying if I didn't say that I didn't enjoy that. I did. There was a lot about it that I enjoyed. But it came to a pretty sudden halt, because I didn't know it at the time, but a little while before then, I'd had an accident erecting a fence in a gale on top of a stepladder, which is not an activity that I'd recommend to anybody. And I ended up I didn't know it at the time, but I burst all of the discs in the lower part of my neck. And not only had they burst, but the sort of jelly stuff that comes out had wrapped themselves around the nerves that go from there, down the arms and legs and everywhere else. And all I knew was that I'd got really, really bad pain, in my shoulder blades, or that kind of rough area, which was getting worse and worse. And it got to the point where I couldn't sleep, and I certainly couldn't travel, and I couldn't do many of the activities that my job involved. And as a result, I wasn't given a choice. I was told that pretty much I could carry on with a desk job, or else they would give me a package. And I suppose it took some courage at the time, to decide to go alone on my own, although it felt the most right decision at the time, that I didn't really need to think about it very much. But if I'd known then what I know now, how difficult it is to re-establish yourself, starting from ground zero. And maybe I wouldn't have done it, but on the other hand, I'm glad that I did, because I certainly, like you, Sue, I don't have any regrets. And I have a feeling that it was what I was meant to do earlier. And in many ways I had been, because my job had involved working with lots of people and understanding people and communicating with them, and obviously being a doctor and trying to heal them and patch them up as best I could. So I guess that was preparation. Anyway, what else do we have?
Just going on for that, just a thought that came into my mind is, not only do we sometimes not take the opportunities, there are lots of opportunities for self-sabotage, which is fear or whatever gets in the way, but that stops us trusting and hearing whatever there is to hear and doing whatever we have to do.
Yeah, this is what we call ego. Ego is no amigo, because ego is the big controller, and it's the one who tries to whose job is to keep us out of trouble, because the ego doesn't trust us. And so it likes to keep us in the routine. It likes to keep us warm, snugly warm, wrapped up in our comfort blanket. And there's plenty of people who say, the Americans say, you've got to get out of the box, or you've got to throw your comfort blanket away. And it's true. If you want to be different, if you want to achieve a different sort of experience, then that means you have to do something different. You will not get it. You will not get it without changing a lot of stuff. This kind of journey there comes a point where you can't keep nudging a little bit one way or the other. You have to decide, there's so many paths you could choose. Right, this one feels right. Let's see what happens. Let's sail our Viking boats up this river and see where we beach.
And burn them.
And burn them, yeah.
I have a question then. It's regarding what we were talking about last week, the destination, and if the future is set or is it just probabilistic. If it's predestined, is it because we live actually in the quantum world, surrounded by the quantum field, and in the quantum world, future, present moment, and past is mixed in one big pot? So then whatever we're doing now already has happened in the future, right? However strange that sounds. So in that case, then maybe this is why we're saying that the future is predestined. But is it not probabilistic then? Why is it not probabilistic? Why? Because that free will, it stayed on my mind since the last show. And I was thinking about it, and I don't have the answer. I don't think anyone has, really. But if we made a decision now, and we're trying to change the trajectory of our future, does it mean in that predestined world, concept of the world, that we made that decision sometime in the past or maybe sometime in the future? Well, where is probabilistic world? Where is it in all that? Probability, I mean.
Well, I know your level of confusion, because when I first started thinking about this particular topic about 3 years ago, I couldn't let go of it, and the more I thought about it, the more nihilistic and negative the message was. But I was able to work through that. And of course, you won't find any scientist who can explain this, but what I can share with you is the certain leading scientists. I mean, well, as you mentioned the word yourself, quantum theory. I mean, nobody can get their head around quantum theory. And then string theory, which is a branch off of that, is even crazier. I mean, a professor explained it on a TV program, and she said you have to think of a sliced loaf of bread, and on each slice, that is one dimension of life, and there's all kinds of stuff going on that slice of bread. And then on the next slice of bread, it's a different dimension with other stuff, but they're all the same loaf. So maybe past, present, and future are mixed up. I mean, just time is a dimension that distorts. But I am nowhere near well qualified enough to talk knowledgeably about this subject. But I would save yourself some headaches, Greg, and not go there really, because you'll have to start inventing gods to help you navigate quantum waters. So it's probably better to stay ignorant of that, other than knowing that there is something greater out there, and just allowing yourself to tap into. So anyway, that's an interesting theory, an interesting one, and that's my sort of 5 penneth of it. So I think we can wrap up now. Thanks again for being here, as always. I can see some of your faces on the screen and some aren't. Thank you for your contributions, and as always, as I said, anything you want to talk about on the show, let me know, and I'm always happy to try and include it. So we'll meet again next week. That's the plan, unless something else gets in the way for all of us. And if we do meet, well, if we don't meet, or whether we do meet, I do hope you have a great week. Allow yourself to get at least a little bit out of the comfort box. The way you can do that is just to do something different. Don't necessarily do something really dangerous or scary, but just do something different. Something you think you might not even like, but who knows, you might like it. So life is about experimentation. We try some stuff, we try some food we don't like the taste. We try other stuff that looks good and tastes good and think, oh, we like that. That's all the choices that are available to us. We live a land of plenty, fortunately. So have a wonderful week. Keep smiling hard. Smile at other people, even strangers. And we'll meet later.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Steve.
you.